it changed? How has it evolved?
You know, when you think about what the Libertarian Party is, it's at its most basic a party that is socially liberal, fiscally conservative. And what that really means is that they believe that there should be less government both in our private lives and also, you know, in our economic lives. So, for example, we're in favor of less government spending, but we're also in favor of less government invasion into personal morality.
Folks, District 15 in the state of Maryland has 6 candidates. 3 of them are Democrats, 2 of them are Republicans, and 1 is a Libertarian candidate. Tell me a little bit of geography of your District 15 and what do people do in that particular district?
I just love this district because it is so split apart. I mean, there's, on one side you have Potomac, and then you have even the most rural parts of Poolesville are all from the same district. So that means that you can't just say, look, we're going to give these type of tax breaks to you or whatever, because it doesn't work that way. There's the only thing you can do in this district is your policies have got to make sense and they have to resonate with people and people have to be able to understand and agree with them. So it's a phenomenal district to work in. And just to let you know what it is, it's parts of Bethesda, pretty much all Potomac, Rockville, parts of Gaithersburg, Germantown, Clarksburg, Poolesville.
They call it the Gold Coast. Everybody's rich up there.
Now,
how do you govern those people? What do they want?
You know, I don't think it's that governs the question of just handing people what favors they want. I mean, I think that's what politics has become, and something I just think is wrong. I think that the job of the politician, of the representative, is at the most basic level to represent the people, and that means reflect their actual views. You know, if one very powerful organization, say you know, teachers union, perfect example, wants one thing, and the entire people that you're representing want something else, and even though that union might give money and has this sort of voting bloc that's extremely powerful, I think that the job of the representative is to see what is beneficial to the people, what do the people want, and part of that job is educating. I mean, a lot of people, for example, haven't even heard of vouchers. So in order to get people to want vouchers, they first have to know what it is. So part of the job is to educate people about what a voucher is and how it can benefit, you know, each person who has a child in school and everybody else who's benefiting from the level of education of the American working force.
Libertarian Party. For most people out there, do you think they are the same as Tea Party people?
You know, I don't really know what I mean, there's a lot of misinformation out there, so I should probably clarify. The Libertarian Party is a very clear stance, and that is we need to have less government both in our private life and in our economic life. The message of the Tea Party, I think, at some point might have started out something similar. At this point, I don't think it is. I think the movement is so driven by emotion. I mean, the one problem that libertarians have is because it's so logical that it's not, you know, it's not emotional, it's not passionate. It's a very logical, very kind of stable viewpoint, and that's a thing that sometimes has made it difficult for libertarians to attract people. The Tea Party is the exact opposite extreme. It's so driven by emotion that it's not clear what the message is anymore. You know, I don't know what the message is anymore. I think that there's, to a certain extent, a belief in small government economically, and I agree with the Tea Party in that particular area. But there's also a certain amount of, you know, fundamentalism, you know, very homophobic approach, which I disagree with. There's a certain amount of almost like racism that I'm seeing, you know, directed sometimes towards the president, sometimes towards immigrants, sometimes towards illegal immigrants, sometimes just towards all immigrants. And at that point, it's something that's just fueled by anger. It's become whatever it set out to do. I think it's lost its way at this point.
Isn't that a great thing, that there's anger out there, there's emotion out there, that they are going to hold the politicians responsible? Isn't that a good thing to have?
I mean, it's good to have passion, but you don't want to have your anger overwhelm your logic. You see what I'm saying? You need to be passionate, you need to be energized, but you don't need to be so emotionally driven that that your actions don't make sense anymore.
You know, the state of Maryland, of course, other states as well, they're spending more money than they're actually getting from the taxpayers. And that's a cause that libertarians have always fought. What are your thoughts on that?
I mean, I think that's absolutely right. I mean, it's the very idea that the amount of money you spend can be essentially limitless is the sort of fundamental fallacy that you're seeing in both sides. I mean, the idea that one side wants to spend as much money as it possibly can, you know, on the military and on war, and the other side wants to spend as much as it possibly can on social support. I mean, you have to at some point say, can we actually afford it? And if not, let's think about a different way to approach this. I mean, I think what I use as the litmus test is not, is this program good? To me, what we have to say is this program absolutely necessary? Not just good, because a lot of things are good. Buying everybody a new car is also good, but it's not absolutely necessary. So that's kind of the viewpoint that I think is really what we need to change to in order to see some more fiscal responsibility actually happen.
One of the famous thoughts of the Libertarian used to be charge no income tax, pay no income tax. How has that changed?
I think that's the utopian ideal. But to me, very much liberty is like a direction. It's not a utopia. It's what you're moving towards. So we're not saying we want no taxes tomorrow. We want to, let's start to reduce government spending. And if we reduce it enough, then we can start to lower taxes. And then if we lower taxes, then we're going to have, more, prosperity. People can spend, in the private sector, and then maybe we can lower taxes even more. I mean, that's the idea. For example, one of the main things that we've been talking about is something called a fair tax. And the interesting thing about the fair tax is people actually don't realize who pays extra low taxes. People say, of course, the poor pay lower taxes, which they do because they have less money.
Sure.
But who else pays lower taxes?
Who?
One, the independently wealthy, the Kennedys, because that money is inherited. It's not income. So they don't pay income tax on it in the first place. If anything, they pay a little bit of capital gains, which is much less than income. So they're getting taxed less. Who else? Anybody who's off the grid. Any kind of criminal essentially pays less taxes. In fact, they pay no taxes because they don't have official income.
Yeah.
So one thing that we've been talking about is something called a fair tax. And the idea of a fair tax is it's like a sales tax, which means that everybody pays it. And no matter how rich or poor you are, you pay some of it. But it adds essentially a pre-rebate for people who have an income below a certain level. So that means we're not saying that people who are poor are going to have to pay such a huge percentage of their income. They're actually going to pay a much lower percentage because you're in advance essentially giving them sort of like a voucher.
But now, isn't that the system prevalent right now?
Right now we have a system where income tax is taxed through a very kind of Byzantine process of laws and regulations. In fact, right now the compliance cost of income tax, not the actual tax, just the compliance cost alone of filling out the forms, counting all that kind of stuff, not including labor costs, is about $380 billion. And to put that into perspective, that would be enough to send 75% of all people in college right now, every single year, send them to college for free. That's the amount of money we're talking about, just as compliance costs. Now, if we shift to a more efficient system that doesn't have those same elaborate costs associated with it, we one, reduce those costs essentially to zero, and two, we're now making sure that all the sort of independently wealthy people, all the people who are making their money from capital gains, not income, are also paying their fair share of taxes, which I think they should.
Tell me a little bit about yourself. Where were you born? What did you do? How did you get into Washington, D.C.?
Yeah, I was actually born very close to here. I was born in Silver Spring. I grew up in PG County. Then later on, we moved to Bethesda. I went to the Landon School for Boys. After that, I went to Brown University. I studied math and economics. After that, I worked as an actuary for about half a year. And after that, I started my own company. It's called Arvin Vohra Education. And that's a company that specializes in high-end education, ranging from private tutoring to software design, group classes. I actually wrote a book recently. It's pretty much anything related to education we do.
What was the book about?
The book is called The Equation for Excellence, How to Make Your Child Excel at Math. And it's a book that's designed to illustrate to parents some of the techniques that high-end private tutors use. I mean, the tutors that are charging over $100 or over $200 an hour, what is it that they do? Because they're not just reading a textbook more slowly, they're doing something fundamentally different. And this book talks about what that fundamentally different thing is.
Like what?
For example, when I'm dealing with a student that has a major area of difficulty, one thing that I don't do is I don't just tell him what to do. Instead, I create a series of progressive steps of difficulty as to work through himself. Also, there's a very strong nonlinear element, which means that it's not like you do this, 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 this. It's like you do this, then maybe you need to talk about something over here, then something over here, then something over here. And that's the beauty of private tutoring, that you can bring these different elements together. And if you know how to do it well, you can make the most unmotivated and the most confused and most helpless student really excel, as long as you're using kind of a technique that makes sense.
So now this is for the parents.
That's for the parents, yeah.
Okay.
And for teachers, actually. A lot of teachers have said a lot of really good things about it.
Oh, that's good. Now, how's your campaign doing?
The campaign, it's really amazing to see how in the day of social media, how fast it's spreading. in the past, if this was 5 years ago, with the budget that we have, we wouldn't have had a tenth of a prayer. I mean, we just wouldn't have been able to buy the airtime. We wouldn't have the resources to get the newspaper ads. But now with social media, you know, people say, oh my God, I really like this guy's viewpoints. And they look through my information page, see what I'm about, you know, what my views are. And it's very direct. It's you know, it's pretty upfront. And they can tell their friends. And, you know, because of that, we now have over 22,000 fans on our Facebook page, which is, you know, just, you know, in Facebook perspective, you know, it's a pretty huge number. I mean, it's unheard of for a third-party candidate to be able to get that kind of publicity, and it's really social media that's allowing that to happen.
Now, social media is all about young people, but the voters are mostly the older people.
For now, and it's not we haven't been ignoring them. We've been reaching out to them too. You know, one thing that I hope today that some of the older people who are watching the show right now are going to, you know, take the time to learn a little bit about, you know, my platform and see if something that resonates with them.
If suppose you got elected, you got in the House of Delegates, and now you have an opportunity to come up with a bill. What will be your first bill?
Okay, the absolute most important thing right now to me is education. I mean, there's parts of Maryland that actually have pretty good education, you know, for American education, which internationally is not doing so well. And there's parts of Maryland that don't. I mean, inner city Baltimore right now does not have a good educational system. And to me, that needs to be addressed. And when someone says, you know, how do you address something like this? You know, as a person that works in education, and I'm working the one part of American education that has been, in a lot of ways, the most successful, that private, completely unregulated part of education, which really allows excellence to flourish. You know, what is it that makes that happen? And it's what I call the 5.5 words that have made America great. And it's those 5.5 words have given us everything. And they've given us, you know, they've given us the best TVs in the world. They've given us the best computers in the world. I mean, Intel and AMD are both American companies. They've given us restaurant choices that, you know, 50 years ago only kings could have possibly dreamt of having, you know. I mean, who could have thought that you could have Thai food and French food and Vietnamese food and all this all in the same? And what are those? And so to me, what are those 5.5 words?
That's
the first
right.
one is, I'll take my business elsewhere. And what does that mean? It means that if you don't like a product, you can buy another product. And that makes everybody not just give, you know, 60%, because if you want people to give 60%, just pass a law and they'll do it. Or 70%, it makes them give 100% or 110%, because they know they have to be as good as they can, because if they're not, somebody else will be.
But that's the capitalist system.
That is the competition, and that is what has given us everything. And the thing that, and even in education for that matter, if you look at our universities, they're the best in the world. And if you look at our public high schools, they're not the best in the world. I mean, there's something that's happening between June and September that is so powerful, and that's 3 months. How are we going from close to the bottom internationally to the #1 international school system? I mean, what's happening in 3 months? And it's colleges have to compete with other colleges. That's what it is. If you don't run a good college, people just go somewhere else. But if you don't run a good public high school in Maryland, people can't go somewhere else unless they're very wealthy. I mean, there's nowhere for them to go.
So what's that bill is going to look like? What are
there's a few different ways you can do this. I mean, one of the most basic first steps that we have to do is we've got to change the regulations for the charter schools. Right now, Maryland has some of the worst charter school laws in the country, the most restrictive. You know, if we had charter school laws similar to what they have in New York, that would be a huge step in the right direction, just right away. And it's a fairly simple set of adjustments, and it's, you know, something that we know works because we've seen it happen in New York. I mean, we've seen it work, so we know it can work, and that to me is an absolute first step. In the larger term, though, there's something else that I think we should have, and there's something called a voucher. And what a voucher is it says that no matter how rich or poor you are, we're going to give you a certain amount of money, a fixed amount, that's going to be attached to your child, and your child can take that money to any school. And if that, let's say that charter is $7,500, he can use that to go to private